So I want to give a big welcome to everybody. My name is Dr. Moriel McDuffy, and I'm also with Dr. Larhonda Harmon today. A little bit about us. I'm a licensed master social worker. I have about 13 years of clinical experience in the field. Dr. Larhonda Harmon is a licensed practicing counselor of mental health. She has about 19 years of experience in the field. So we're coming to you today and to just talk about how to talk to your kids about racism. Mm-hmm. And this presentation is twofold. First, I just want to highlight some brief impacts of racism, and then we're going to get into how to counteract and strategies to use to counteract some of those influences. So I'm going to start by talking about some of the impacts of racism, and I know many of people know them well. Many of you know them firsthand. And the thing about racism is it impacts us in a variety of different ways, right? And we're talking about kids, the places where they see the most are school and so within the education system, as well as the healthcare. So we know there's a lot of healthcare disparities that occur, and we know that within school there's a lot of things that happen, right? But one of the things that happen when they consistently have these racial events that happen or these different traumas, sometimes you might even know that it was racial, but it happened to you, and they form this trauma. And I just want to explain real briefly what happens to somebody when they're under constant trauma, right? And I don't know how many of you heard of fight, flight, or freeze, but I'm just going to break it down really simply. So imagine you're walking down the street in your neighborhood and a pit bull runs out and charges you, right? How your brain reacts is it spits out what's called a stress hormone, right? Think of the stress hormone is called cortisol. And that alerts you that there's danger. So, of course, your heartbeat starts rushing and you make a quick decision, right? Fight, flight, or freeze. Me, I'm out. I'm running, right? I'm running as fast as I can run to get out of there, right? So, but some people, they decide they're going to fight. They're like, listen, you get out of here, though. They might bark back at them, hit them with something. What do you got to do? And other people, they don't make a decision at all. They just freeze. All this happens in a split second. So now imagine you're walking through your school or down the street, and you have a bunch of these racial incidents, and cortisol kicks out, but there's no dog. There's no danger. So this is what happens to somebody who's traumatized by racism. You have this stress hormone constantly invading your body from your brain's telling your body to produce it when there is no danger, right? But what it is a defense mechanism from the trauma that you're experiencing from the racism. So what happens with that long term? With that, it's a prolonged exposure, right? It means it's happening all the time. Anxiety, right? It can cause anxiety. It can cause depression, digestive problems, right? It can cause heart disease, a variety of different issues, sleep problems, and sleep problems in turn lead to other things, right? And a lack of sleep on an extremely high level can cause psychosis. So there's a lot of negative health issues, right? Without me getting too technical, a lot of negative health issues that come from racism and comes from, the trauma that it brings to you. So I want to kind of talk about internalized racism first, all right? And I want to start with an example. Internalized racism, right? Kid looks at me in my face. I'm a director of a reentry program, right? And my boss was black. I had coworkers who were the same level as me, directors in other areas, were black. And he said, when you see white people, they have very nice jobs, they work in nice offices. But when you see black people, they work at McDonald's. So what happened there is this particular kid heard somewhere these messages in society that said, you're unintelligent. You can't, you're going to be poor all your life. You don't have ability. And he internalized that into himself. And he said, black people work at McDonald's. So this particular kid decided and limited itself based on the messages that he's seen. And the worst part about it is he looked me in the face, who was also African-American, who also did not work at McDonald's, who also was educated, and he ignored all the other people around me who also were educated black people. So internalized racism leads to when you internalize what somebody else says about you, it becomes internal oppression. It affects your behavior. It affects your actions. When it happens as well, you know what? It's funny. I didn't even put up the PowerPoint. Let me look at this. So when that happens, right? When you're looking at, let's look at, internalized racism. I'm going to put this PowerPoint up. I'm going to share my screen with you. So internalized, I want you to really look at this picture. When you look at this picture, what you see is a young lady who doesn't look particularly angry. She looks more sad, and it's very subtle. So your child, if they internalize racism, you won't notice. The way you'll notice it is by subtle things. You'll notice withdrawal. Oh, I used to go and I used to do this activity at the Boys and Girls Club. Now, I don't want to do it anymore, right? You'll notice that the self-esteem is lower, and it's very subtle. It's not as it's not outward. Let's say that they go inside. So they'll start to limit their ability, like the example that I gave. And you have to, as you look at it, and I go into the externalizing behaviors, it's the same type of thing. It's I'm internalizing it, or I'm fighting it, though, which is a little bit different, or I'm fighting the racism, and this is the only way I know how to fight it. And a lot of it might be fisticuffs. You might be fighting. You might get into more fights. You may start hanging with people who you weren't hanging with before, who are delinquents, right? It just depends on, it really depends on that particular child, what that externalized behavior looks like. Maybe they just get more in trouble at school, and it might look like more like class clown behaviors than like behaviors that, than the actual like delinquent get arrested behaviors. There's a range, and it depends on your child, and you know your child better than I do. So, but when you see those behaviors that are different from what they were, that are externalized, that are outside of them, that are outward, that's when you know that there might be an issue with, something. And it could be racism, it could be something else. But when there's racism involved and they internalize it, or they're fighting it, sometimes they don't know how to fight it. So without the social skills and the understanding to fight it, you fight it how you know how. And a lot of times that's externally. And as I mentioned, and I have these things written down, I'll have the PowerPoint on my website, usualpolitics.com. So you'll be able to go on if you want to go through these things as a definition, and it talks about aggression and withdrawal, and even reduced grades at school and the internal oppression. So school, on average, children spend about 6 hours at school. So a lot of the influences that they get, a lot of the racist experiences that they have are at school, whether peer-to-peer, teacher-to-peer. It just depends. And school has a way of evaluating and then labeling. They give you tests. You score A on a test, you're intelligent. You score B on a test, yeah, you're pretty intelligent. C, you're average. Below a C, you're unintelligent, right? So think about some of the labels you've heard from school. Smart, dumb, intelligent, not intelligent. Individual education plan, special ed, right? Socially, emotionally disturbed, right? So you have all these labels, and kids can internalize those labels. And within my career, I've sat in meetings and I disapproved of the way that certain people talked about the kid while he's right there. They say, oh, well, he needs to be in a meeting, but then they pretty much in a nutshell say, oh, you're unintelligent right to his face, and that's never helpful. So as parents, we're going to talk about ways that you can counteract those things and counteract, those messages that they get. So I want to talk briefly about this thing called teacher expectation bias. And the research for this has been around forever. And we're going to break it down very simply. If a teacher has positive expectations for your kids, it impacts your behavior positively. Karen comes to school. Teacher says, Karen, you're so bright. Karen asks a question. Teacher's responsive. Karen gets A's and B's, right? As a result. Raheem comes to school. Raheem might have a little bit of behavior problem. Teacher doesn't think Raheem's very bright. Raheem he has average grades. Right? Now Raheem asks a question. Teacher's not as responsive to Raheem. Right? So they have negative bias about Raheem, positive bias about Karen, and it affects the kid's behavior because the kid notices, right? And not only does the kid notice, those biases affect the teacher's behavior. So the teacher may not be as responsive to Raheem because she doesn't think Raheem is as smart as Karen, might be more responsive to caring. And these are the things, this research has been around a long time. That teacher's expectation makes a difference. It makes a major difference. And we're going to get into that, into how to kind of, what we can do to counteract a lot of those issues when we're talking about the teacher expectation bias. And all you got to remember is that teacher's expectation, whether it's positive, which is going up, or negative, which is going down, it affects the kid's behavior, believe it or not. So when we're talking about school as well, the last piece that I'm going to say about school, besides the teacher expectation bias, is school does not teach Black history in any type of meaningful way. It teaches it in a very minimalist way. So essentially, when you go to school, what I was taught, and my nephew who went to a lot of private schools, what he's taught, slavery and civil rights, right? You were slaves and civil rights, and just a little bit of the in between, right? They don't teach all of the great accomplishments of African Americans, right? And really, or any other group for that matter. Mostly it's, and when you have people who are African American, or you have people who are whatever, they're not identified. So you might say names, but you don't identify that they're African American, which could help an African American kid's esteem be higher, to help them. And it could help even a white kid to look and say, oh, well, they have contributions, not think that, oh, African Americans are just poor and they're unintelligent and they're, contributes to the stereotypes. So, one of the things that we're going to talk about in terms of what we do about these influences is just simply identifying positive role models historically, positive Black role models, historically and today. And some of this historical can be your family members, right? If you have a family member who did something, anything, if they were a brick mason, right? Then highlight that. And I want you to understand that if you look at Black history, if you look at African American history, the littlest of things were amazing in a time of great oppression, right? So I'll give you an example. Soul food. How did somebody take scraps? These foods that people are eating, collard greens, cornbread, right? This is the most basic example. People said, up here, take these scraps. Unvaluable, right? It's unvaluable. Here, y'all aren't good enough. Y'all get to eat the scraps. We're going to eat this good stuff over here. But we took it and people turned it into something delicious that people have restaurants to make a lot of money off of, right? So think about how great that is in a time when somebody told you you're nothing, told you, matter of fact, you're subhuman, and then they throw scraps at you and you turn them scraps into something delicious. So we have to be able to point out those positives for our children. We have to be able to change the narrative. When they have all of these things coming out and these stereotypes saying that, hey, you're unintelligent, you're not smart, you're not bright, you're subhuman, you're violent, we have to be able to tell them you're smart, you're strong, right? You're intelligent. And here's your evidence, right? Your evidence that you're intelligent and smart and strong is that such and such was in our family and he did A, B, and C. He's related to you. Such and such is Black, right? Let's talk about Garrett Morgan. Let's talk about Katherine Johnson. Let's talk about Mae Jameson. So you have all of these Black people in history that aren't talked about in school that we need to teach our kids about. And in simple, school is not enough. We have to educate our kids at home. We have to have those conversations, right? When we have those conversations, it helps to build their esteem, and it needs to start early. If it starts early enough, and we have our own narrative to counteract the narrative of the school, the labeling of the school, we have to label our kids ourselves. Because if you really think about it, anytime you're in society and there's all these negative messages, it's a brainwashing job. So we have to do our own brainwashing job on our end, right? So I want to talk about just briefly as far as the conversations that we have with our kids, right? Younger kids highlight the positive. You don't have to get deep. You can just name people, right? Like the people I named, like Katherine Johnson, who basically did math that computers couldn't do in the 60s when America was trying to get to the moon, right? People didn't know much about her till the movie, what's the movie called? It's a movie that came out about her. I can't remember what the movie's called, but the thing about it is that's inspirational for young Black people, and especially young Black women, right? Katherine Johnson. Nobody talked about her. She was treated like crap because she was Black and she was a woman. But she did all the math behind the scenes, right? Mae Jameson, right? Garrett Morgan. All these people created stuff that were things that were great and that were usable and make everyday life better, right? Or they accomplished things that other people couldn't accomplish, and they were ingenious. So we want to make sure that we're telling our kids about this young. Just highlight the positives and give them give them some basic knowledge of how Black people are intelligent. So I'm going to give you 3 themes that you should always incorporate into everything that you do. Number 1 theme, right? And think about it, these are overarching, so you can do whatever you want, but just be consistent. That's the key. Blacks have accomplished much in the face of extreme odds, right? Blacks have accomplished much in the face of extreme odds, right? And here's the thing. I know this is very Afrocentric, but if you're Latino, you can have the same theme. If you're Asian, you can have the same theme, right? So the truth is there's no group on earth that hasn't had accomplishments. And part of the racism is to ignore accomplishments. So if we can create that narrative, that's one thing, since a kid can talk. Hey, you know who this guy is? He's great. He's Martin Luther King, right? That's theme 1. Blacks have accomplished great things in the odds. I mean, yes, and in the face of extreme odds, right? Number 2, Blacks are brilliant. Even if your kid is a great athlete, encourage them in the academic arena, encourage them to develop their mind. Let's understand this about school. School only really covers one form of intelligence: categorization and labeling, right? Most of school is categorization and labeling. Now, if I'm going to give you an example, if you have a kid, you can have a kid who CD student, average, nobody thinks much of, but some guys like that, I've seen guys who they can go and take a car apart and put it back together with no training, right? There's a certain amount of spatial mechanical intelligence in their brain that the average person doesn't have, which is honestly is brilliant, but nobody in school is going to recognize that because there's no auto mechanics unless you go to like a Votech school, maybe, right? So we can't allow the school to define what intelligent is for our kid. We have to tell our kid what intelligent is, and when they do their evaluations, don't stick to those evaluations, right? Blacks are brilliant. That's the number 2 theme. Number 3 theme that you follow when you're creating your narrative. You have great ability if you work to develop it. And listen, you can use whatever words you want, but pointing out your kids' strengths and also interpreting the world for them. Like when they see George Floyd, interpret that for them. If they're younger kids, interpret it for them. If they're older kids, interpret it for them. It's going to look different if they're younger than if they're older. If they're older, they might get more detail, right? I remember growing up, I heard a lot of different stories, right? From my dad, my granddad, from different people, right? My dad told me a story how him and a friend went into a astronomy class. Only 2 Black people to go in there. It's 1960 something. And you know what the professor said? What are you 2 dreamers doing there? Wow. Go here. So this is the tale of 2 different people. He said his friend never got over it. My dad, the type who says, I'm not listening to what he says, right? He's more rebellious, and he's not worried about what one person says. He didn't internalize it. So he just keeps moving, right? So you had to create your narrative. The narrative that he had was he knew Blacks were great. He knew Blacks had done a lot. He knew the history. So he didn't let anybody else tell him that, right? So I'm going to leave you with this, and then I'm going to pass on to Larhonda. The last piece, which is spirituality. And this is going to be quick. I promise. I know I talk a lot. But anyway, so spirituality, there's a lot of studies that talk about spirituality. And when I say spirituality, it's what it looks like for you, right? For me, it's Christianity. For somebody else, it's Muslim. For somebody else, it might just be meditation, right? But spirituality is a source of strength. It's a source of coping. And whatever spirituality that you have that's helped you, it can probably also help your child. So you need to make sure that you have those conversations, that you teach them what you do, and that you instill that in them. Now, listen, we know that they're going to get 18 and make their own decisions, but any coping mechanism that you can give them, including spirituality, is going to be important. And there's a lot of studies on that. There's a lot of studies, particularly related to Black people and how we coped with slavery, how we coped with civil rights, and all types of things. Religion and, well, spirituality was a big part of it. It was spiritual coping. So that's just something else to think about. And I'll leave you with that. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take a second and make my colleague the host so she can go ahead and present the rest, and then we'll talk a little bit later. It's all yours, Larhonda.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. What I'm going to do is to share my screen first. So bear with me. Slideshow. Just bear with me. So again, my name is Dr. Larhonda Harmon. I am so privileged to be here. Thank you, Dr. McDuffie, for inviting me. And I want to get into some purpose. And it's really a continuation of what Dr. McDuffie said about spirituality. Our children need to have a sense of purpose. Like, why am I here? Because if they have a sense of purpose, they will be able to counteract racism more effectively. So that's what we're going to be talking about for a few slides. So the first one is like, who are you? That's a conversation to have with your children. Who are you? And a lot of times when I ask that question to my clients, they'll say, well, I'm a mom, I'm a teacher, I'm a doctor, but they don't really have a clear sense of who they are. So to align with what Dr. McDuffie said, one simple thing that you can teach your children, and actually this might be helpful for you as a parent, is you are a spiritual being housed in a physical body. Like, our children need to know that they are more than just a physical body that shows up in the world. They have a soul, and really the soul is the seat of our emotions. It's the seat of our will. It's the seat of our mind. And they need to know that they have something beyond the physical realm, as well as a connection to a force that is higher or greater than themselves, that indwells in them, or that is a part of them based on whatever your spiritual teaching is. So it's important that we teach our children that they are, yes, of African descent, and they are spiritual beings. And when you're a spiritual being, you can work in the miraculous, and you can respond in a miraculous way, even when you face racism. So how do you help them understand that they're a spiritual being as well as to believe in themselves? Now, as Dr. McDuffie was talking about with the teacher biases, if they base their belief of themselves on what their teacher says, or their pastor, or their priest, whatever their religious teaching is, or what the community says, or what society says, or what the media says, they'll constantly be shifted because they don't know who they are and they don't believe in themselves. So a part of our work as parents is to help them understand who they are. And so if you look at this slide, it says be plus live is believe. In other words, we want to teach our children to be themselves and to live their lives. Then the question might be, well, how do you help them believe in themselves? Like, what is that all about? What is that conversation about? By the way, you're going to notice me say conversation a lot, because it's our responsibilities as a parent to have conversation with our children and not to depend on the system to have these conversations with them. So one thing we want to teach them is self-love, that they have a sense of their own power based on the source that they're attached to, whatever your spiritual teaching is, and also based on who they are. They come from a long line of ancestry that goes beyond the shores of America. Like, it's important that they learn their history here and before we arrived here, because then they can love themselves and have a sense of pride in who they are. So we want to teach them self-love. We want to teach them to appreciate themselves, to know who they are. And you know what? Some children, and I may cover this in the next slide, but I'm here right now, so I'm just going to go here. Some children really, they don't even know who they are to even love themselves. And one of the things that I find with children and adults is this notion that I am not enough. Like, this need to always you're up in the world.
Larhonda, you just froze, just so you know. You just froze.
You just froze.
Yep.
Gotta go back. Am I back in now?
You were saying your need is not enough. I'm not enough.
Oh, yeah.
You said I am not enough.
Yeah, so a lot. Thank you, Dr. McDuffie. So what a lot of children struggle with, and adults, is this whole notion that they're not enough, that they're not adequate enough or competent enough or smart enough. And because of that, people can become very self-disparaging, very self-judgmental, and very self-critical. So we want to teach them to love themselves as they are, being who they are and living as they are. And what does love mean? So you as a parent have to decide what that conversation looks like. How would you define love? I know for some people, love is unconditional, right? It's kind, it's gentle. If we want to go to the Bible, for some people, love is need. I need you, so therefore I love you. People have different definitions, but you parents, you're the ones who will teach your children what love is, and then teaching them how to love themselves, as well as teaching them about their own identity. See, someone cannot call your child out of their name or use the N word when referring to them if they truly know who they are. Spiritual beings living in a physical body, descendants of Africa, and whatever it is, whatever else you want to teach them, because it's more than Africa. We know that a lot of us have a lot of ethnicities within us because of what happened historically. But you want to be able to teach your children that and give them a sense of identity. Again, it has to come from you. It cannot come from the textbooks. I used to be a school teacher. I was a school teacher in an elementary school setting for 8 years, and then I also taught at the college level. And when I look at some of the textbooks and some of the lessons that I've seen other teachers teach to our children, it could be very discouraging. That's why it's important for parents, for us as parents, to get involved in our children's education and involved in teaching them who they are. Because we are their first teachers. We can't depend on the system to teach them who they are. We have to do that. And that is through what? Conversation. And I'll talk more about conversation in a moment. So Dr. McDuffie thought that it would be really important for me to talk about purpose. Because again, if children have a sense of purpose, they'll be able to retaliate some of the injustices that are imposed upon them based on racism, whether it's systemic racism, societal racism, internalized racism, colorism, all the things, all the challenges that they face. We want them to have a sense of purpose because they'll be able to counteract them. It's so funny. As I'm sitting here talking, my little son is trying to invade my room. Mommy's working. Sorry, guys. So how do people learn how do we teach our children purpose? Well, their why points to their purpose. Why am I here? Why was I even born? I've asked that question of myself. Many of you may have asked that question of yourselves. Why was I even born? I especially found that question asked a lot in the 20s, and I see that with 20-year-olds. It's like, what is my purpose in this world? So I'm going to help you parents to be able to have these conversations with your children about identifying their why. So this is called a trifecta. And you'll see 3 areas. One is interest and activities, the authentic self, and the heartbreak. If we look at these 3 areas, we can help children identify their why, their purpose, why were they born. So what is the trifecta? We want to talk to them about their interests, things that they enjoy on a regular basis, things that they would do if money was no concern, if time was no concern. And they may need help with that. So for example, you may something like, I noticed that you enjoy reading. I noticed that you like building things. I noticed that you are very talkative, or you like interacting with your friends a lot. And so when you have these conversations with them, you're helping them to identify, oh, you seem to be interested in these things. Maybe this is why you were born. Maybe this is your purpose. And then the authentic self, that's the qualities that they have that show up no matter what, especially when no one is looking. Who they are at the core. You want them to be able to see their natural talents and see their natural gifts and have conversations about that so that they can come up with who they really are, how they really show up in the world, whether they're introverted, extroverted, quiet, noisy, gifted, talented, musical, athletic, intelligent, whatever the case might be. And then the last area, some of you may be saying, a heartbreak, well, what is that about? Yes, that's very important to see what your purpose is. It's the problems that you observe around the world that you want to see solved. it's the things that bring you pain. So part of the reason Dr. McDuffie has chosen to do this webinar today was because of the pain, the heartbreak of seeing brothers like himself be pulled over by cops for no reason. Like we had a conversation yesterday. He was talking about this, it was like a decade of his life where he was pulled over quite a bit. Why? Because of the color of his skin. That caused him enough pain that he's saying, you know what, I'm going to actively work at making sure others or other young brothers and sisters don't go through this. So that's the heartbreak. When children can see, like if you notice that your child is very compassionate with friends, or if they want to help people out, because, or like, you know, sometimes a child might see someone that is homeless and they may really have deep compassion. Maybe that'll help them understand, you know what, I'm meant to help people out. I'm meant to provide some service. I'm meant to be a support. So these, again, are the things that you can talk to your children about. Now, how do we as parents cultivate our children's purpose? Think about that for a moment. How do we do that? Do we even know that we should? Because honestly, growing up, and I grew up in a different era, growing up, I don't remember these kind of conversations. And when I got my teaching training in school, I don't remember conversations about helping children understand their purpose in life. But I'm here to say that if your children understand what their purpose is, again, they'll be more intentional about how they react or prevent even the racism that they face in this world and the other social injustices that they may face. So one way to do that is through positive reinforcement. Now, this is a saying, connection comes before correction. And I'm going to get into positive reinforcement in a second. But I want to emphasize the need for parents to connect with your children. How many times do we look at ourselves even or observe other parents where you see everybody in the same room, but they're all on their devices? Everybody's in their own world. And it's not until Johnny does something wrong, it's like, why'd you do that? A lot of times children only get attention when you catch them doing something that you deem wrong. And the answer or the solution to some of the problems that we face in the home as well as outside of the home, especially when it comes to racism, is that we need to connect with our children. How do we do that? You see this image here of this family like being very close knit. They're touching each other. They're happy together. So like, you know, if you're one of those parents that's constantly corrected, and you have to ask yourself, when do I spend time with my child? How often do we do it? What is the quality of that time together? So the way that you can connect is to kind of think about these things. And this comes from Dr. Shefali. She's very well known, been on Oprah and things like that. And she's written a book called The Conscious Parent. So this came from that book. But she says that every child wants to know three things. One is, am I seen? Do you see me, Mom? Do you see me, Dad? Do you see me when I'm doing right? Do you see me when I do the dishes when you don't ask? Do you see me reading my book? Do you see me studying? Do you see me when I'm with my friends? Do you see me? Do you even notice me in the business of your life? And parents, I understand we have to work. Some of us are in school. Some of us are working. Some of us are caregivers for our parents. We're very, very busy. So this is not a judgment. At the same time, we have to find a way to coexist with working and other responsibilities, as making sure that our children know that they are priorities. The second one is, am I worthy? Am I worthy of your time? Am I worthy of your energy? Am I worthy of your resources? Am I worthy of a conversation? Can you listen to me talk about how I was playing outside with my friends, even though inside as parents we might be like, I don't really want to hear this story. But for our children, they want to know that they're worth the time. So we have to just kind of listen and really be engaged. And then the last one is, do I even matter? Do I matter? And they all are aligned. But that's how you connect with your children, that you see them, you let them know on a regular basis you are worthy, and you also let them know that they matter. So you're balancing connection with correction. And again, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how you can institute correction in a very loving way a little bit later. So I love this quote. I see this image, and this little girl's like, proud to be me. Like, you want your children to feel a sense of pride. And I'm not talking about pride like an arrogance, but like a sense of like self-dignity and self-respect. Because when they have a sense of self-respect, when they are mistreated, they will respond in a way that upholds their dignity and upholds their self-respect, and also upholds the respect of their community, upholds the respect of their ancestors, upholds the respect of their elders. So you want them to feel this sense of pride. And I like this quote. It says, when a person feels seen, feels worthy, and feels they matter, they grow up with an empowered life. Now, granted, your children will face racism. They may even face police brutality. They may even face, I'm thinking about when they go out in the workforce, when, there's not equal opportunities. They're going to face all types of discrimination. The thing is, if they feel empowered within themselves because they know who they are and they believe in themselves, they again will be able to respond in a way that aligns with their own value system that you help them come up with. So you're not only teaching them, you're helping them come up with their own. And there's a way to do that. By the way, let me just say this, because I think I meant to say it before. There's this thing when it comes to discipline. As parents, we can be fast and furious. Why'd you do that? Didn't I tell you not to? Or we can be slow and curious. What made you do that? I noticed that you didn't wash the dishes at 6 p.m. when I asked you to. What was going on in your mind? Was there something else distracting you? Like having those questions, those conversations where you're asking genuine questions, because it really gives you insight into your children. And it helps you to strengthen their own self-empowerment because they have a mind. I was watching a video yesterday and the person was like, first of all, respect me and like shut up and listen or something to that effect. Like this older woman was telling a younger woman to do that. And it's like, no, children have a voice. Let them talk. In fact, why don't you be more inquisitive so that you can understand them more? Because if they know that you're listening, that you see them, that you consider them worthy, then they're going to feel more empowered and they'll be able to be assertive when necessary. Notice I said assertive and not aggressive, but aggression, it has its place too. And I may even talk about that in a moment. So let's get to this positive reinforcement. How do you reinforce that self-love, that self-identity, that self-empowerment? Well, let me just talk about what positive reinforcement is, first of all. It refers to giving a child something that reinforces positive behavior. So let me just say this. People get this confused, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit more in a minute, but positive reinforcement does not mean something pleasant or something nice or good. Positive reinforcement means that you add something. So that's important. You have to add something to increase behaviors that you expect. So in other words, if you notice your child doing something that's really beautiful or acceptable or compliant, you can give them verbal praise or encouragement. Or you might give them a tangible reward such as money or a toy or a gift or something. So you're giving them something to increase the positive behaviors. So if they do their chores, they get an allowance at the end of the week because that will motivate them to continue to do their chores. It could be physical affection or a gesture like a hug or a high five or a thumbs up. It also, and I think this one is so valuable, this goes into that connection, active listening and quality time. I don't know that we give our children enough of that where we really pay attention to what they say. So we're not just like, yeah, oh, okay, I get that. No, but we're really listening. And they know that we're listening because we ask questions. So these are forms of positive reinforcement. Then we have negative reinforcement. Just like positive reinforcement means that you add, negative reinforcement does not mean something negative or mean or nasty. It means that you take away something. And guess what the goal still is? Any form of reinforcement is to increase the behaviors. And you might say, how do you take something away to increase the behaviors? That's why I provided an example, because sometimes that gets a little tricky to understand. So the example here is before behavior. So you have the complaining parents, clean your room. I'm so sick of this messy room. Do what you're supposed to do. Behavior, child cleans room. Because the room is clean, the parent takes away the complaining, removes the complaining, right? And so what happens? The child keeps cleaning. The child keeps the room clean because you took away the complaining. So the key is positive and negative do not mean good or bad. Instead, it means add or take away something to increase. It's always about increasing behavior. So how do you parent African-American children amid racism in unprecedented times? So it's a book that was written called Sticking To, Watching Over, and Getting With. It's an African-American Parent's Guide to Discipline. I highly recommend it. The author is from University of Pennsylvania. And the first one is he provides these 3 ingredients for effective discipline in the Black community. So the first one is sticking to. That is that unconditional love and support. That's when you give your children affection, hugs, time, energy. Like they know that you value them. They know that you see them. They know that they're important. The next one is watching over. So you give them some loving supervision and protection. By the way, loving does not mean all the time. It's not always fluffy. Sometimes love is tough. So for example, if you see your child running out into the street when there's oncoming traffic, you might yank them and say, get yourself out of that street. That's love because you want to protect them. So when I say love and supervision, and I think when the author was saying love and supervision, it's not meant that it's always nice. It's like, what is the most loving thing to do for my child in this moment? And sometimes that's kindness, and other times it can be harsh because they need that. And then the last thing is getting with. So that's love and confrontation and accountability. We have to hold our children accountable. We can't let them just go out and do anything they want to do and not say anything. We can't allow them to engage in certain behaviors that we know is going to bring negative attention to them, especially when it comes to law enforcement. So like that love and confrontation, if you see them doing something or wearing something or acting in a certain way that you know will warrant some type of attention, negative attention from either law enforcement or from some other people in the community, like you want to confront them about that. It's your job. It starts with home. Yes, those of us like Dr. McDuffy and I in the field, it's our job too. Yes, it's the teacher's job too. Yes, it's the community's job too. But the number one teacher again is you as the parent. So make sure you confront your children when necessary. And I know that this can be so overwhelming. Like I meet with a lot of parents and they're just like, I don't know what to do, especially those parents who have Black and brown sons. It's really challenging for them, for all sons and daughters, but it's in particular for sons. And they're like, this is so overwhelming. And it causes so much anxiety for them. But I like to remind them that you're not alone because you have a village. Identify who your village is. Parents, if you have family members, community leaders, neighbors, cousins, aunties, uncles, teachers, whoever, wrap around your children. Wrap around them. Latch onto these other people and you'll be strengthened in making sure that your children have what you need. And if you're doing it by yourself, ask yourself, who can I call on? Sometimes in our pride or sometimes we don't want to be a burden to other people and we're like, I'm not going to call that person. I'm not going to seek this service. It's like, no, that's what's available to you. And that's a very African way. I spent 5 months in Ghana, West Africa, and that's what I saw. I got to witness it firsthand, that it really was the whole village that raised a child. It really was. And so just know that you are not by yourselves. And that is it for me. So what I'm going to do, if I can use this technology, is switch it back over to Dr. McDuffie. So let me see.
Thank you, Dr. Harmon.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. And I want to thank you just for definitely doing this with me. One of the things that we wanted to do was just provide, and I want to consistently do is provide some type of webinar, some type of education video for the community. And regardless of whether you live in proximity to me or you live across the country or in another country. So one thing that I put together, because I asked you to tell your kids about Black history, is I put together some resources, and I'm going to put them on. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to put these resources up so you can get a good look at them. But I'm going to tell you, you can find these resources at my website, usualpolitics.com. And if you go into the store where it looks like a little purse on the right side by the bar, it's 3 lines like a bar. And if you click on it and go in, it's free. You can just download it. There's a few other sites I just want to highlight. Library of Congress. You may not think of Library of Congress as having Black history, but they have a lot of Black history, a lot of original documentation. Another one on this list, of course, usualpolitics.com, right? I'm going to be doing, I've already done some videos about racism on a variety of different topics if you want to get deeper. But there's a Black Inventor online museum, and I have the link on there. It's just blackinventor.com. The biography channel, history channel, Black Past website. So it's already posted on my website, usualpolitics.com, right on the homepage. you'll see like a little purse. Click on it. They'll go in the store. You can download it for free. So we'll have those resources, and I'll also be posting this webinar for free on the website, usualpolitics.com, and I want everybody to know. So I kind of wanted to go to questions right now. Anybody who had questions? So I'm going to stop share so we can answer any questions. One other thing that I just wanted to backtrack just a little bit, because it's one thing that I really, I had a few questions, things about school that I just wanted to say to parents. And I think Dr. Harmon kind of touched on it, is stay involved with your school's education, with your child's education. And as far as finding out what the teacher's doing, telling your kid before school what to expect. I go to school. When you go to school, if you tell your child, if you have questions, you don't understand the work, raise your hand, ask your teacher the question, right? And the teacher should come help you. So if you tell your child that, follow up with them at the end of the day. Hey, how was your day? Do you understand your work? Did the teacher help you? Because those are things, if the child says, no, I didn't, they didn't help me, I don't understand it. Now they gives you the opportunity to help, but it also gives you the opportunity to have a conversation with the teacher about what your child did or didn't learn, if that makes sense. So even if you have a job where you can't leave and you can't go to school all the time, email can be your best friend, and or whatever platform they use, because teachers often have these different platforms like Class Dojo where they have messages. So use the technology. You can do all of it through your phone. So even if you don't have a lot of resources, you can do it through your phone. That's great. And stay in contact, because they'll be more responsive. I think Dr. Harmon told me this the other day when she was a teacher. They'll be more responsive to you if you are talking to them.
Yep.
If you're talking to, so that's big. And I'm going to tell you from experience as a person who got in trouble in school a lot when I was a kid, when your parent is constantly coming in advocating for you, then, it makes a big difference. And I'm going to tell you, I some administrators that I have on my Facebook, I know from when I was in middle school, they were like, hey, is your mom still around? Yeah, tell her I said hi. She did a great job. They gave her like a lot of props, a lot of respect, because she constantly went in and advocated for me. And there were not a lot of people who thought that I was going to be a PhD doing free webinars with Dr. Harmon here. Just so you know. Right. So what I see on here, we have, I serve as community school coordinator and use Class Dojo. So thank you, Colette, for that input. Appreciate it in terms of Class Dojo, because that's definitely one of the programs that I know that they use. That's what my daughter's teachers have used in the past, Class Dojo. And some of them like email, some of them like messages through Class Dojo. It just depends on how your teacher communicates, but it's an easy way of communicating from a distance, where you don't have to, because it's going to be hard to catch a teacher on the phone during the school day and even after the school day. So we're waiting for any questions.
I see some things in the chat.
Yeah, I'm looking in chat right now. It doesn't look like there's a lot of questions, so.
Well, I have a quick question.
Okay.
First, my phone starts doing. Well, a comment and a question. So I can understand and appreciate the focus on academics as a person who did well in school, and I got a lot of self-esteem from doing well in school. But I guess I just question, we're all not excellent students, you know what I mean? And we're all not going to college. That's not everyone's path. Is it okay, to focus on other attributes in your kids? You know what I mean? Like, I love the way you treat your baby sister. The way you help out around the house is really important to our family. Just really to shift the focus from academics, because everyone's not excellent in school. And there are so many other parts of our lives which are important, such as how we treat other human beings. So what are your thoughts about that?
You want to take that, Dr. Harmon?
Sure, I absolutely do. That's an excellent question. And it goes back to what I was talking about earlier, Deanne, with the whole notion of teaching our children to believe in themselves, be who they are, who they truly are, whether it's academic, whether it's musical, whether it's athletic, whether it's spiritual, whatever that is, just encouraging them to be themselves and to live their lives. That is what believing in yourself means. And to be honest, give them some examples, because many of the millionaires in the world didn't go to college. So and that brings up another thing, having conversations with them about what success is to them. Because years ago, success meant you graduate from high school, you go to college, you get married, you have a baby, you work, you retire, you die. That was the narrative of the old, but we live in a different time now. So having conversations with them about what true wealth is. Is wealth monetary? Is it inner peace? What is that? So again, that would be my way of approaching it. But more so than this, parents of old, my generation, 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, probably beyond, we used to tell our children, this is what you have to do. Go to this, do this, do that. Ask your children questions. They really have something to say. They have value. They teach us a lot if we just listen. My 4-year-old teaches me a lot if we just listen. So be more inquisitive, be more curious instead of, like, I encourage parents all the time, we have a habit of being lecturers. We just lecture our children. If we just sit there and ask them questions, we learn a lot more about them. Yep. So that would be my approach.
I just want to add to that just a little bit too. And this is just, what I was saying about the schools earlier. I'm going to tell you somebody who was not a good grade school student. Einstein. He didn't get good grades. So I guess I shudder to, because somebody's not good academically. All I'm saying, I think you should develop a child holistically, right? You need to develop all those different things. But I think we should never take anything off the table because you just never know, and that's, so, and just looking at Einstein, I mean, he wasn't, but he was probably he was the most brilliant mind of his time, and maybe of any time, so just not letting the school or anybody, because the grades aren't good, dictate what it is that your child becomes,
Absolutely. I saw something from Colette Butler.
Yes. Okay. I have a comment regarding helping the children figure out their why. Many parents don't know their why. So how do parents and children discover this together? Would you like to take this one first, Dr. Harmon?
Yes, of course. That's an excellent question. What's unfortunate, Ms. Butler, that parents don't even think to have these conversations. They don't think about discovering their why because they weren't taught. Remember, there are things that have been passed down from the generations. And so when I meet with adults, parents, mothers in particular, in therapy, a lot of times they have no sense of what their why. They don't even think to ask the question. They're in survival mode. How do I take care of my children? How do I make sure that there's food on the table? How do I pay these bills? How do I manage my own stress and be able to be a caretaker to my children? And so it's hard to say, but those of us who know to encourage people to do this, to know those of us who know to have these conversations, we have to maybe ask them. Those of us who are in the professional realm, whenever we meet somebody, that we have conversations like, "Hey, who are you? Like, what is it that you enjoy doing?" You know what I mean? Like, just kind of. I'm gonna be honest, Ms. Butler. I used to go to homes. I was a mobile therapist at one time. And I worked in inner cities, primarily in Philadelphia and Chester, Pennsylvania. And so, I would go there to help with the children's behaviors. But how I talked about children want to know, am I worthy? Do you see me? That was important to me when I went to homes with mothers. And let me just say, I had some fathers, but mostly mothers that I work with. I went to a lot of single parent homes. Like, it was just like, I needed them to see that they were worthy. So I don't care what the house looked like. I found something that was beautiful. And then I would sit there, how are you? What's going on with you? Like, just having heart-to-heart conversations, and not from a place of professionalism. Like, I'm the therapist going in to save the day. It wasn't from that place. It was a place from human dignity. Like, I respect you as a mom who is doing your best. And I'm intrigued by you and I want to get to know you better. And how can I be a support to you on your journey of discovering who it is that you are and what it is that you want in life? So that's through conversation. Remember, I talked about connection before correction? That we have to find ways to connect. Like, even when I was helping teachers out in school settings, I would tell them, why don't you connect with the child, connect with the parent before you go into correction mode? Because people will be more apt to hear you and receive what you have to say if they know that you're really invested in them as human beings. So it's through conversation.
Mm-hmm. And I just like to add just one thing, Dr. Harmon, is just exploring things. Let me tell you, sometimes as African Americans, we put ourselves in too much of a box.
Yeah.
And I was a wrestler. And because I was a black wrestler, I was known as that wrestling guy. I played football and I ran track, but I was known as that wrestling guy. And you couldn't tell me that I wasn't going to be some type of pro athlete. No, I thought I was, but the reality is that's not my claim to fame at all, right? So it's exploration. It's exploring a variety of different things until you figure out what you want to do. And exposing them, putting them in positions to do that. Like, I took a sociology class when I was in 11th or 12th grade, and ever since then, I like the social sciences. So I think to add to what Dr. Harmon is saying, and having those conversations and having that connection, you can have kids try different things, try things that, that normally inner city black kids or wherever you're from or whatever, that normally a lot of people wouldn't do because you might like it, thinking outside the box.
That's an excellent point. Excellent point. And I think also another thing is, I think what you talked about earlier, Dr. McDuffie, in terms of the spirituality, that is a key in helping people understand who they are and why they were born and how they can show up in the world. That they can see themselves beyond their physical limitations. Because a lot of times it's mind over matter. That if you can see it in your head, you can manifest it in your life. And so, like, we want them to be visionaries.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I've had children say, I want to be a doctor and an astronaut and a fireman. And I'm like, awesome. They will learn over time that, okay, maybe I have to just choose one, but you don't want to squash their dreams. You don't want them to shrink back because of our limitations as adults. Sometimes we impose our limitations on them, and that's so unfair. And our parents impose their limitations on us because of their own anxiety or their own experiences. So I do love the idea of encouraging them to explore different things and opening their minds up to endless possibilities.
Yeah, absolutely. And we got another comment by Colette Butler. And by the way, Colette, I want to thank you for your feedback on this webinar. It's much appreciated. I think the challenge is developing trust between the parent and the school. So many parents have had negative experiences at school. Yeah, and I would agree with you definitely with that one, Colette. I mean, it's difficult. Honestly, it's difficult when you're talking about underserved populations, and you're talking about any type of institution. It's always very difficult. One of the things I think that buffers that is building a strong relationship, some type of restorative relationship with parents, being open with them, encouraging them to come in, even when they're angry and they come in, thanking them for coming in, and, schools can be difficult places because I know there's good teachers, you have unions and you have administrators and they all have to kind of like mesh together. And as well, people can have the best of intentions, but still not be as effective with a kid as they need to be. And sometimes people don't want to deal with parents, because they may feel like a parent has attitudes. There's also parents, from my experience of working with parents in schools, as MST therapists, some parents go in hot-headed and angry because they don't know what to say, and they don't understand that system. So the only thing they know how to do is go in and yell and scream. If, as an administrator, you can somehow normalize their anger and say, hey, listen, I get why you're angry. I understand. But let's talk about it. If you can normalize their anger and bring them down here to your level, where you're at, then at the end of the day, I think that's where you can start some type of useful dialogue that helps both the child, the parent, and the school to be on more of the same page. It's really about being restorative. And I know that I've taken a lot of restorative trainings over the years, but I know that everybody's not restorative, and they don't always. It's not always even. I don't think that people always even get what that means sometimes. But I think that's what we have to work towards, and even being proactive with parents and telling them positive things about their kids. If you have a kid that gets in trouble all the time, call when they do something positive and say, "Hey, I just wanted to let you know, Raheem had a real good day today, and I know we always call you for negative, so I wanted to give you the positive news. Give them an extra ice cream cone or something for dinner, extra dessert or whatever." So that's my take on it, Dr. Harmon.
Yeah, and what you're talking about, Dr. McDuffie, is one of the things that we discovered in MST therapy was like there's this whole homeschool connection that if you keep that going, it will help. I do know that there are some people, some schools that are taking action. I know my son was supposed to go to preschool in Wilmington, and they had where parents were going to homes in the beginning of the school year to meet families. So I think the schools are realizing that they have to make a better effort at connecting with families. I don't know how many schools are doing that, but I think that is awesome. Like just the whole community engagement and really it goes back to the same thing. I value you enough to even come to your home and sit and talk with you and answer any questions that you have. I don't know logistically how realistic that might be school-wide, but I do think it's a step in the right direction.
No.
To build that trust for parents to trust schools more. Yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, it's difficult, especially considering, where you have underserved populations, they usually have less resources, which also one of the factors that contributes to some of the educational disparities. So.
Yeah. But you know what, that brings up something too, because going back to the whole notion of a village, that might be an opportunity for community leaders, church leaders, different religious institution leaders to create forums for schools and parents to come together and have these conversations. You know what I mean? So that's what I'm talking about. It has to be systemic. Everybody needs to get involved to create these conversations. So that's another way that it can be built between the school and parents.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that, the village, that's, it's valid. Sometimes, if a school did connect with churches, they may be able to have volunteers for after school programs or whatever, whatever extra resources. I mean, I've seen it, where people did have volunteers, especially, let me tell you, a population to tap into is the elderly, because when you have people who are retired and, they're looking for things to do, they'll come out and help kids do math and English and things like that, especially in the after school program. So sometimes it's about connecting the pieces and, really building alliances in the community.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And so I guess that's it. Unless anybody has anything else. and we went a good hour and 3 minutes. This is a production of Politics as Usual on usualpolitics.com. We also have some other videos. I got a video that talks about how to adjust to school during this hybrid and online setting. So go to the website, as well as we'll have the African American resources. It'll be in the store. It looks like a little purse. Just click on it and go in, and it's free to download. And if you got any questions for us, you can always email me at pau@usualpolitics.com. This is Dr. Moriel McDuffie and Dr. Larhonda Harmon, my guest, who has been great. You can also check us out on YouTube. Just Google Dr. Moriel McDuffie YouTube station and Dr. Harmon. She's around, so anything that you send to me, I'll make sure she gets it as well. All right, this has been politics@usual.com and usualpolitics.com, and we're out.
Yes.